Welcome to this short lecture on monetary policy. This video is part of SF5. It's a continuation of the discussion started in macroeconomic equilibrium. So if you have not watched that video or you have not done the questions and mastered the concepts, I highly recommend you return to that video, watch it, make sure you have those concepts down, because we're going to use the entire process in that video within this monetary policy video and then expand on it a little bit. So it's important to have the core skills down so then you can work on new core skills that build on top of them. So in this video, we're going to discuss contractionary monetary policy. There's also expansionary monetary policy. It has symmetric effects. They're basically the complete opposite. I leave that out of the video and ask you to work out that example in the questions because I want to make sure that you understand the concepts. If you watch this contractionary monetary policy video and do not understand how to do the next question, I recommend that you do not go and look at the answers. Instead, rewatch this video, write down maybe some questions you have and bring them to office hours. And then we'll talk about this contractionary example in more detail, and we'll talk about it in section. And then hopefully you'll be ready to assess your understanding by doing the expansionary monetary policy problem. So let's get started. Suppose the Federal Reserve sells some bonds. How is this going to influence the money supply? Well, pause the video and answer the question if you can. But if not, I'll go ahead and answer it for you. When the Fed sells bonds, it's giving people in the bond market the bond certificates, and it's taking their cash, so it's drawing money out of the economy, so it's lowering the money supply. When the money supply decreases, I want you to go ahead and draw money supply and demand diagram and to verify that you have that concept down pat and figure out how this influences interest rates. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Great. So at this point, you figured out that interest rates are higher. So that means both that I is higher, the nominal interest rate, that happens directly. But through the Fisher effect, it also implies that the real interest rate is higher. Since the real interest rate is higher, how is that going to influence the components of aggregate expenditure? Go ahead and pause the video and explain to yourself which components are going to change and how and why, and then what the net effect is on AD. Great. So at this point, you figured out that both C and I change. We know that when the interest rate is higher, people are going to want to save more, which means they consume less. And since interest costs are higher, businesses are going to invest less. Those loans are more expensive. It turns out that we haven't talked about this one directly, but you can figure out with the open economy model that net exports are going to decrease too. And that's because when interest rates are higher in the U.S., net capital is on net capital is going to more capital is going to flow in. That's going to decrease the supply of dollars in the FX market, which is going to raise the real exchange rate. And we know that with higher real exchange rates, we're going to have lower net exports. So AD will shift in, since these three components have decreased. So now that we know AD shifts in, we go to basically the same analysis we did in the macroeconomic equilibrium slides. In the macroeconomic equilibrium slides, I worked out the inflationary gap case where AD shifted out, and I asked you to work out the case where AD shifts in. We call that a recessionary gap. Hopefully you're comfortable working through that process and understanding the recessionary gap. If not, we're going to work through it in the next few slides. Your focus as a student is got to be on understanding the links between these variables. So we start with the Fed decreasing the money supply, and then we need to work out the implications for the nominal interest rate, the real interest rate, the components of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand shifting. When aggregate demand shifts, how is that going to influence real GDP and prices in the short run? And you should be able to label that short run equilibrium. And then we're going to work out the long run implications, which are a little bit more complicated in the monetary policy case compared to what we did in the previous lecture. So here is the diagram hopefully you drew in working out the implications of this change in aggregate demand. We initially started at E0 here. Then our aggregate demand curve shifted back. We got to this short run equilibrium where prices are lower and output is lower. So this was a recessionary gap. That more people are out of work as well. If you watch the Oken's law lecture, then you know that we have a quantitative way to relate decreases in output to increases in unemployment. Now, a lot of firms have sticky prices, so they like to lower their prices, but they haven't been able to. But everyone knows that in the future, they will lower those prices, and that's going to cause aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply to shift outward. So we'll get this aggregate supply curve, and then it'll shift a little more, and we'll get this one. And slowly we transition to the long run, where we get this short run aggregate supply final curve. That brings us to our long run equilibrium, where prices are permanently lower than when they started, but output is back to its long run level at Y long run. So the chain of logic is to write the whole thing out. We'll break it into two parts: the movement to the short run equilibrium, and then the transition to the long run. The money supply decreased. This drove up interest rates, the nominal interest rate in the money market. That, because inflationary expectations are fixed through the Fisher effect, we get a higher real interest rate. That drives down investment, consumption, and net exports, which causes AD to shift in, and that moves us directly to our new short run equilibrium. So that's short, where prices are lower and output's lower, and we have a recessionary gap. Now we start to transition to the long run. Prices are lower. That means that on our money market diagram, money demand is going to shift in. That's going to bring interest rates back down to their original level. That's what we see in the money market diagram. So you can go ahead and draw that in. We'll see it on the next slide. On the ASAD diagram, we have prices are lower. That means expectations of prices will continue to go down as some other prices become unstuck. So AD is shifting to the right, and we end up with Y permanently lower than it was before, and Y increasing just back to its original long run level. Ideally, you will learn not just how to write the symbols here, but to explain it in words like I did, because on the test, to a certain extent, David surely prefers the written explanation. Although the starting point before you get to the verbal explanation is to use these chains, as I like to call them, where we just focus on the variables. So in the money market, as we said, money supply shifted back. That was the Federal Reserve's choice. We went to a short run equilibrium. Prices were lower. We knew that prices would continue to go lower. Eventually, this causes money demand to shift back. So we started at this interest rate. That was our initial equilibrium. Then we had the short run higher interest rates, and eventually we get back to the same level of interest that prevailed at the beginning when money demand finally shifts back to this M1D. So the two questions basically ask you for the first one to work through everything in the symmetric case of expansion of the money supply. So we call that expansionary monetary policy. It's going to shift the aggregate demand curve out, and you're going to have to work out the implications. The goal here is to just get practice working with both the ASAD diagram on one side of your paper and the money market diagram on the other, because we have action in the short run and in the long run on both diagrams, as shown in this video. And the second problem basically asks you to work out, basically, if you work at the Fed, what would you do to help fight recession? How can you use monetary policy to fight recession? We can talk about that in office hours because it's a great application. I mean, this is critical. This is what the Fed does every day, every week of the year, especially for the past 6 years. And this is the main reason the Fed is thought to be one of the most powerful institutions in the world, because they have the power to mitigate recessions and keep the economy from going into the next Great Depression. Thanks for watching.